Hi folks, this is Dr. Raskoff and I want to show you around a little bit on how to do a graph for the Marine Mammal Lab. So I'm going to use one of the versions of Excel that's out there. You might have one that's like this, it might be a different one, but hopefully this will give you an idea on how to proceed. And Excel can do these graphs pretty well. The only real issue is what to do for a secondary y-axis. We probably mentioned that in the lab. So assuming your data looks a certain way, Excel can do a fine job with the secondary y-axis. But then I'm going to show you at the end here how if your data is a little bit different, it maybe is not going to be the best options, right? And I'll tell you about another one when we get there. So what we have here is some data, and let's say this was our data from the Marine Mammal Lab, right? So we were in Site A next to Hopkins Marine Lab, and let's say we had 157 seals, right? And then we found some otters in some other locations, and let's say we got lucky and even saw one whale, and then just to top it off, we saw a big potted dolphin go past us towards the end, all right? So what we're going to do now is start making our graph, and we're going to graph all of the data at once, but just grab the data, okay? We'll use the site information there in a moment, right? It's not smart enough to know what to do with that. So we're just going to grab all the numbers and their titles. Let's go up to charts and then do a column graph. And the first one, the clustered column, is probably the best one to use here. And let's make our graph a little bit bigger so we can see what's going on here. And it looks okay, looks all right. What we see as a problem here is though, because we saw so many seals and so many dolphins, we can't even really see anything about the supposed otter and whale that we found here. Like, I can't even see the whale. I don't even know where it's supposed to be. So we have, there's the reason to think about using a secondary y-axis, right? The other thing I'm going to do right off the bat here is because I'm annoyed with these colors, is choose some colors that maybe pop out a little bit more. You can go over here to chart styles and choose some other sort of versions. They're not always the best, but maybe that's a little bit better than the hazy one I had before. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start by remapping the names of our sites, because our sites weren't 1, 2, 3, 4. They were A, B, C, D, right? And you can imagine in other situations you'd want to have words there or whatever. So we're going to do a right click on the chart area here and go into select data. I'm going to select data, and then down here where it says category X axis labels, that's where you can click in there and say, okay, Excel, I want you to use these letters over here, right? So I just highlighted A, B, C, D, E. Right, use those letters here and put those as your y-axis or your x-axis. And as you can see down here, it already even changed them before I even said okay, right? So it can give you a little preview about what's going to happen. All right, so I've correctly labeled my x-axis there. Now let's go in and try to modify this y-axis, okay? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go in and I'm going to click on just one of the bars, right? So I'm just going to click on the seals, and you'll see that I just clicked on seals over here because only the seal numbers are highlighted. So I clicked on seals. Now over here up on chart layout, and click on the chart layout up here, and then I'm going to go down here beneath where it says seals, which again shows me that I've selected just the seals. I'm going to format the selection. So I click on format selection, and under axis I have now a second option of the secondary axis. So I'm going to use secondary axis. I'm going to click on that and say okay, right? And then we can see automatically right off the bat that we have a whole bunch of new numbers that have popped up over on this side, whereas previously we just had numbers over on this side. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I want, since the seal numbers and the dolphin numbers were kind of in the same ballpark, I'm going to put both of those on the same scale, and I'm going to put the otter and the whales on another scale because they're in the same ballpark. So now I'm going to go over here and I click on just the dolphins, right? Dolphins gets highlighted. It says dolphins up here. Again, format selection. And the same thing, I'm going to say, hey, I want to put the dolphins also on that same secondary axis, and hit OK. All right, now the graph looks way different, right? So let's take a look at this. It's a little harder to understand at first glance because we haven't labeled our axes and things like that. So we're going to have to be careful. But what we've done is we've said, I want the seals and the dolphins, right? So the blue and the purple to be on my secondary axis, which is over here. So this is the scale to use for those two. Whereas now my otters and my whale, I read those on my first of my y-axis, right? So we've used two different axes for two different groups of numbers, right? And it lets us see the numbers here, especially for whales and the otters, which were kind of hidden before, all right? So next thing you need to do, all right, to help out your reader big time is select your chart and go over here to the chart layout, and you need to label these axes, right? Because now it's kind of complicated what's going on. So now when you click on the axes titles, we have primary and secondary, right? So let's click on the primary vertical axis title. So let's see, I'm going to go there and I'm going to put in here, let's see, I'm going to call this, let's see, we had over here, sorry, I'm trying to click on this, there we go. So on this axis, remember we had otters and whales, okay? So now I'm going to click again and go label the other secondary vertical axes on this side. And on this side, we had the seals and dolphins. All right. Assuming I spelled, no, I did not spell that right, did I? That's a new species. Let's see, or did I spell that? See, I can't read this when it's sideways. Maybe this is not the best option, but you got the idea. All right, so click over there. So now I've got a little bit of information. It's a little small, a little hard to read. You can adjust the size of those things by going over back to home, and you can adjust the size of the text, or maybe you want to make that text a little bit bigger so it's easier to see what's going on over here. So maybe I'll increase the size of those up to maybe 12 point or something like that. Makes it a little bit easier to see. Likewise, maybe while I'm doing it, I want to do the same thing down here with some of the other numbers. Maybe those should be a little bit easier to read too. Okay, so you got the idea. If you find that this little legend over here is kind of awkward, and if you have space, you can even put it other places. You don't have to leave it over on the side. It's not a bad place to put it, but there's options there. Sometimes it can be helpful to move that around and give yourself a little bit more space other areas of your graph. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. You might want to now label the x-axis down here. So you do the same thing. You click on the chart, go to chart layout, and now you're going to label the primary horizontal axis. And so you could go down here and give it some interesting title, I'm trying to double click on this. You could say something profound like sites or something like that, right? And then we could go back to the home button and increase the text size if we wanted to make it balance with the others. So now let's take a look here, see if this looks good to us. So over here it says, okay, everybody, use this side for otters and whales, use this side for seals and dolphins. Now it's still kind of a lot of work for the reader because they have to go over here and figure out which one's which on the legend over here. There are ways of actually sort of labeling maybe the bars themselves. If that's kind of another thing you could do if you wanted to kind of up the quality. But so you're welcome to play around, do lots of different things. But that's how you'd add a secondary y-axis. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that there's a place where this becomes a problem. Okay. And I'm going to show you a situation of that. Let's say we didn't just have seals over here in site A. Let's say we also had some otters. Let's say we had 3 otters over there. Okay. Now, 3 otters, on my scale over here, 3 is bigger than the number of seals that we found. And see what Excel did is it put the otter bar in back of the seal bar, which is not really very helpful at all. Thank you. So this is where Excel really kind of falls apart. There's no reason why it does this. I consider this just a major bug in how it handles these y-axes. So if you have more than one thing at a site, it can be kind of problematic, right? Especially, let's say we had a fair number of those. Let's say we had 20 of those, right? Then things start to look weird, right? So we got lucky in my example here where we only had sort of the big numbers were all by themselves, right? Or more precisely, that first big number was kind of all by itself. So that's one of the challenges here, okay? Now it still works. You can still make it work that way. One other option though that I want to show you. I'm just gonna now take this and delete that graph. Go back and show you actually a simpler way to maybe get the job done in a situation where that's not going to work for you. Okay, so highlight the data, go back to cluster column. So I'm back to where I started here. All right, I could go back in there and reselect my x-axis things. I could go back up here and reselect a version of the colors I liked better. All that stuff is the same, right? And if I knew I had problems, like let's say I did have I had a couple otters, and maybe I had one more whale in that location too. A secondary x or y-axis is not going to be helpful there because those bars are going to be behind the other, and you're going to see one of them, not the other. So here's a kind of a quick and dirty way of doing this. If I double click, let me do that again slower. If I go over here to the vertical axis and I double click on any of the numbers, I can go up here to the scale of that y-axis, and I could choose a logarithmic scale. All right, now the problem, as you might know from a logarithmic situation, is there's really no such thing as zeros. Okay, so what it will do is just sort of turn everything. It will start at 1 really, if you want to do this, right? So I have zeros in here, right? I have like 0 whales, right? And I have a minimum of 1 whale over here or 1 otter over there. If I go back and choose logarithmic scale and say okay, what it will do, unfortunately, right, my whale, anything that's 1 doesn't show up. So that's a bit of a problem, right? So what you could do is go in here and say we're going to sort of maybe add an extra 1 to the whales. Let's see if we could fudge the numbers here a little bit and put sort of 2's there. And I can make everything sort of 1 bigger. I know it sounds really, really weird. We're just thinking about a sort of a workaround here, right? So if I went back in here and readjusted these things, we're a little bit now off because there's not 4. There's really only 3 otters there, but it does let me see those whales. And the only big problem is I've got this I've got this problem here where I have a single number that is on the x-axis that I'm trying to deal with, right? And it won't let me keep that as a 0. So one of the things you could do is go back here and literally just cut and paste a single letter or a number 0 and put it in that place. All right. So there's a really kind of not a very elegant workaround. But if I did have numbers that were not 1, right, if all of my numbers were bigger than 1, this option works really well, okay? And in situations where you have some values that are way bigger than others, this is actually a perfectly acceptable place to use a logarithmic y-axis, okay? So my example turned out to be weird because I had some 1's in there, right? But assuming your numbers are not 1, then you don't have to worry about any of this weird stuff of having to like readjust the data and all this kind of crazy stuff to sort of make it work. All right. Okay, so I hope that made more sense than confusion and gives you a little bit of idea on where you can go with this to try to solve some of your graphing problems. All right. Talk to you in class.